Hello, dear friend. Thank you for being here with me tonight, for choosing this quiet moment together. I'm grateful that you've taken this time to pause, to breathe, to let yourself be present in this gentle space we're about to create together. Settle into your most comfortable position now, letting your shoulders drop and your breathing slow. Feel yourself sinking deeper into wherever you're resting, knowing that you're safe and cared for in this moment. Tonight, we journey to the misty highlands of Scotland, where an old castle holds secrets waiting to be discovered. Let your mind drift as we count gently backward. The Highland mist clung to the ancient stones of Abermoire Castle like a silk shawl draped across weathered shoulders. Alistair Mackenzie stood at the castle's threshold, his weathered leather satchel heavy with the tools of his gentle trade, soft brushes for dusting pages, white cotton gloves for handling precious volumes, and small vials of conservation oils that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme itself. At 53, Alistair had spent the better part of his life in the quiet company of books. His hair, now silver at the temples, caught the pale Scottish light as he breathed in the crisp air that carried hints of heather and rain-soaked earth. The invitation had come 3 weeks ago, written on cream-colored paper in fading ink. Sir, we request your expertise in cataloging and restoring the private library of Abermoire Castle. The collection has remained untouched for nearly a century. The castle's caretaker, a gentlewoman named Mrs. Elspeth, had met him at the village inn that morning. Her eyes, the color of autumn leaves, had held a particular softness when she spoke of the library. "It's been waiting," she had said simply, as if books themselves could feel the passage of time, could long for human touch and understanding. Now, as Alistair crossed the castle's ancient courtyard, his footsteps created soft echoes against the moss-covered stones. The afternoon light filtered through breaks in the clouds, casting long, peaceful shadows that seemed to welcome him home to a place he had never been. The castle's interior embraced him with the scent of old wood and forgotten roses, tapestries, faded but still beautiful, hung along the corridors like memories of brighter days. His fingers traced along the stone walls as he walked, feeling the coolness of centuries beneath his palm. Each step on the worn wooden floors created a gentle creak, a musical note in the castle's quiet symphony. Mrs. Elspeth led him through corridors lit by tall windows that looked out onto rolling hills painted in every shade of green imaginable. The glass was old, slightly warped, so that the landscape beyond seemed to shimmer like a dream half remembered upon waking. "The library is through here," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the whisper of her woolen skirt against the stone steps. They climbed a spiral staircase, each step worn smooth by generations of feet. The banister polished to a deep, golden gleam by countless hands. at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Elspeth produced an old brass key from her pocket. It turned in the lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through time itself. The heavy oak door swung open on silent hinges, as if it had been waiting patiently for this moment. Alistair stepped across the threshold and felt his breath catch in his throat, not from surprise or shock, but from a deep, settling peace that seemed to flow through his entire being. The library stretched before him like a cathedral built for quiet contemplation. Tall windows lined one wall, their panes catching the late afternoon light and scattering it in gentle patterns across the room. The light fell softly on hundreds of leather-bound volumes that lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines creating a tapestry of deep browns, rich burgundies, and forest greens. In the center of the room sat a large oak table, its surface smooth and inviting. A reading chair, upholstered in faded velvet the color of wine, was positioned perfectly to catch the light from the windows. Beside it, a small side table held a brass oil lamp with a chimney of frosted glass. The air in the library held a particular quality, not musty or stale, as one might expect from a room sealed for decades, but somehow alive with the essence of all the words and thoughts and dreams that had once filled this space. It smelled of paper and leather, of old ink and the faintest trace of pipe tobacco, as if some long-ago scholar had just stepped out for a moment and would return presently. Alistair set down his satchel with the reverence of one entering a holy place. His footsteps were muffled by a thick Persian rug that lay beneath the reading area, its patterns still visible despite the softening touch of time. He approached the nearest bookshelf with the slow, measured steps of someone savoring a long-awaited moment. The book seemed to hum with quiet energy, row upon row of volumes that had been waiting patiently for someone to notice them again. His fingers hovered over the spines, reading titles embossed in gold that had dimmed but not disappeared. Observations on Highland flora, medieval poetry of the borderlands, the architecture of sacred spaces. As he pulled the first volume from its place, Alistair felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest, like warm honey. The book opened easily in his hands, its pages yellowed but intact, the text still clear and readable. Someone had loved these books once, had cared for them, and read them by lamplight on evenings much like this one. He carried the book to the reading chair and settled into its embrace. The velvet, though faded, was still soft against his back. Through the tall windows, he could see the Highland mist beginning to thicken as evening approached, wrapping the castle grounds in a cocoon of gentle gray. The book in his hands was a collection of botanical illustrations, each page revealing detailed drawings of Scottish wildflowers. The artist's hand had been sure and gentle, capturing not just the appearance of each bloom, but somehow its essential spirit as well. Alistair found himself studying a drawing of Scottish bluebells, their delicate heads bowed as if in prayer, and felt a kinship with whoever had sat in this very chair, perhaps a century ago, turning these same pages with the same quiet wonder. Time seemed to slow and soften around him as he worked. He moved from book to book with no sense of urgency, each volume revealing new treasures, a collection of Highland folk tales, handwritten in a careful script, a botanical journal filled with pressed flowers, their colors faded, but their forms still perfect. A volume of poetry where someone had penciled gentle notes in the margins, creating a conversation across the years between reader and writer. As the afternoon light began to fade, Alistair lit the brass lamp. Its warm glow pushed back the gathering dusk, creating a circle of golden light that seemed to exist outside of time itself. He had found what appeared to be the library's catalog, a handwritten ledger that listed each book with meticulous care. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, belonging to someone who took pleasure in the simple act of forming letters on a page. The catalog revealed the personality of the library's previous keeper. Volumes on astronomy sat beside collections of children's fairy tales. Serious treatises on Scottish history shared shelf space with romantic novels. Botanical guides nestled next to books of philosophy. This had been the library of someone who saw no boundaries between different kinds of knowledge, who understood that all learning was connected like streams flowing toward the same sea. As he worked, Alistair found himself falling into a rhythm as natural as breathing. He would select a volume, examine it gently for any signs of damage, make notes in his own careful script, then return it to its place before choosing another. Each book seemed to tell him something about itself. This one had been someone's favorite, its pages soft with frequent turning. That one had been consulted for specific information, certain pages marked with small, careful bookmarks. Another had been read aloud, its margins filled with tiny notes about pronunciation or emphasis. The sound of his pen scratching against paper blended with the gentle whisper of pages turning, creating a quiet music that seemed to belong to this place, to this moment. Outside, he could hear the soft patter of Highland rain beginning to fall against the windows, a sound as comforting as a lullaby. As full darkness settled over the castle, Alistair found himself drawn to a particular section of the library that seemed somehow different from the rest. The books here were older, bound in leather that had deepened to an almost black richness with age. Their titles were harder to read, embossed in silver that caught the lamplight like whispered secrets. He selected one volume, feeling its weight in his hands like a small, sleeping creature. The book opened to reveal pages of the most beautiful illuminated manuscript he had ever seen. Each page was a work of art, the text flowing around intricate decorations of Celtic knots and Highland thistles. The colors, Deep blues and rich golds, emerald greens and royal purples seemed to glow with their own inner light. This was no ordinary book, but something created with love and infinite patience by hands that understood beauty as a form of prayer. Alistair sank deeper into the reading chair, the book cradled in his lap, and felt a deep peace settle over him like a warm blanket. The text was in Old Gaelic, but interspersed with English translations in a more modern hand. It appeared to be a collection of Highland legends and stories, tales of misty moors and ancient stones, of lights that danced over lonely lochs and voices that sang in the wind. As he read, Alistair felt as if he were being welcomed into a tradition that stretched back through generations. A continuous thread of storytelling that connected him to all who had sat in this chair before him. The rain outside grew steadier, its rhythm against the windows creating a natural percussion that seemed to underscore the ancient words on the page. The lamp flame flickered gently, casting dancing shadows on the walls that made the books seem to lean in closer, as if they too were listening to the stories being told. Time lost all meaning in the lamplight circle. Alistair read of selkies who shed their seal skins on moonlit beaches, of standing stones that hummed with power on certain nights, of gardens hidden in mist where flowers bloomed that could heal both body and heart. Each story seemed to open a door in his mind, revealing landscapes of imagination that felt as real as the chair beneath him. As he turned the pages, he began to notice something extraordinary. In the margins of the manuscript, someone had added their own stories, written in the same careful hand that had translated the Gaelic text. These were personal tales, memories of Highland life, observations of seasonal changes and local customs. Reading them felt like discovering letters written by a dear friend, intimate glimpses into a life lived with attention and gratitude. One passage, written beside a story about the healing properties of Highland springs, caught his attention. Found the old well today, hidden behind the brambles, as Mother said it would be. The water runs clear and cold, and tastes of earth and sky. I understand now why the ancients believed such places were sacred. In the silence beside the well, I felt connected to something larger than myself, something that has been waiting patiently through all the years for someone to remember, to witness, to care. Alistair felt a deep recognition in those words, an understanding that transcended time and individual identity. This unknown writer had felt what he was feeling now, the profound peace that comes from being fully present with something beautiful and meaningful, the sense of connection that bridges all the apparent separations between past and present, self and other, human and nature. He continued reading, each page revealing new layers of wonder. There were pressed flowers tucked between the pages, their forms still perfect, though their colors had faded to sepia tones. Small drawings decorated the margins, sketches of castle turrets against stormy skies, Highland cattle standing patient in the rain, single flowers that seemed to capture the essence of entire meadows. The book became a conversation between generations, each reader adding their own voice to the chorus of those who had loved this place, these stories, this way of life that honored both solitude and connection, both tradition and personal discovery. As the night deepened around him, Alistair found himself adding his own small marks to the margins, not words, but gentle pencil sketches of what he saw from the library windows, the silhouette of hills against the starlit sky, the pattern rain made as it streamed down the glass, the way the lamplight fell across his own hands as he turned the pages. He felt no need to hurry, no desire to be anywhere else. The library had become a world complete in itself, a place where time moved according to different laws, where each moment could expand to hold whatever wonder it contained. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. The lamp flame danced its quiet dance, and the books around him seemed to breathe with satisfaction at being noticed, appreciated, loved once again. In the deepest part of the night, Alistair came across a page that seemed to speak directly to his heart. It was a meditation on the nature of solitude, written by someone who understood the difference between loneliness and chosen quietude. In the silence of the library, surrounded by the thoughts and dreams of all who have written and all who have read, I find I am never truly alone. Each book is a companion, each story a conversation. The solitude I have chosen is not empty, but full of possibilities, full of connections across time and space, full of the deep peace that comes from being exactly where one belongs. Below this passage, in different handwriting and clearly added years later, someone had written, "Yes, this is why we keep the old places alive, why we tend the books and stories like gardens, not for ourselves alone, but for all who will come after, all who will need this sanctuary, this reminder that beauty and wisdom persist through all the changes of the world." Alistair closed his eyes and felt the truth of those words settle into his bones. This was why he had devoted his life to books, to the quiet work of preservation and care, not just for the books themselves, but for what they represented, the continuity of human hope and wonder, the belief that beauty matters, that stories matter, that someone, somewhere, will always need the sanctuary that only books can provide. When he opened his eyes again, the first hint of dawn was beginning to touch the edges of the windows. The rain had stopped, and in the growing light, he could see the highland landscape emerging from darkness like a watercolor painting slowly taking form. Mist clung to the hills, and far below, a small loch reflected the pale sky like a mirror. Alistair rose from the chair, his body stiff, but his spirit renewed. He moved to the windows and stood looking out at the awakening world. The library behind him felt different now, not just a room full of books, but a living space that had welcomed him into its story, made him part of its continuing narrative. He returned to the illuminated manuscript, carefully closing it and holding it for a moment against his chest. Then he placed it gently back in its spot on the shelf, his fingers lingering on its spine. Around him, the other books seemed to settle deeper into their places, as if they too were satisfied with the night's work. As the morning light grew stronger, filling the library with a golden glow that seemed to emanate from the books themselves, Alistair found himself drawn to explore sections of the library he had not yet discovered. In the growing daylight, he could see alcoves and hidden corners that had been invisible in the lamplight, each one revealing new treasures waiting to be uncovered. Behind a tall shelf dedicated to Highland history, he discovered a narrow corridor lined with smaller volumes. These books were different from the others, more personal, more intimate. As he examined them more closely, he realized he had found what must have been the private journal collection of the castle's former inhabitants. Each volume was bound in soft leather, worn smooth by frequent handling, and filled with handwritten accounts of daily life in the Highlands. One journal, bound in deep blue leather that had faded to the color of twilight, drew his attention immediately. Opening it carefully, he found himself reading the words of someone who had lived in this very castle during the late 1800s. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, belonging to someone who took pleasure in the simple act of recording their thoughts and observations. October 15th, 1887. The heather has reached its full bloom across the moors today. From the library window, I can see purple waves stretching to the horizon, as if someone has spilled amethyst across the landscape. The sight fills me with such profound peace that I find myself returning to the window again and again, unable to quite believe that such beauty exists in our world, and that I am privileged to witness it. Alistair settled back into the reading chair, the journal cradled in his hands like a precious thing. Through these intimate words, he was meeting someone who had sat in this very chair more than a century ago. Someone who had looked out these same windows and felt the same sense of wonder at the Highland landscape. The journal continued, each entry revealing more about its writer. A woman named Moira, who had been the castle's librarian and keeper of its scholarly traditions. Her words painted pictures of castle life that were both exotic and utterly familiar. Evenings spent reading by the fire while Highland storms raged outside. Mornings walking through mist-shrouded gardens where ancient roses still bloomed against crumbling stone walls. Afternoons cataloging new acquisitions while rain drummed gently against the library windows. November 3rd, 1887. A traveling scholar arrived today, seeking access to our collection of Celtic manuscripts. It has been so long since anyone has shown interest in the old texts that I felt quite overwhelmed with excitement. We spent the entire afternoon in discussion of medieval illumination techniques, and I showed him the Book of Highland Legends, which he declared to be one of the finest examples of Highland manuscript art he had ever seen. How wonderful to share these treasures with someone who understands their true value. Alistair smiled, recognizing the feeling Moira described. It was the same joy he felt whenever he encountered someone who shared his passion for old books, the immediate connection that formed between kindred spirits across any distance of time or circumstance. As he continued reading, he began to understand that Moira had not simply been a caretaker of books, but a scholar in her own right. Her journal entries revealed extensive knowledge of Highland history, Celtic mythology, and medieval literature. She wrote with the authority of someone who had spent years studying these subjects, but also with the wonder of someone who never lost sight of the magic contained within ancient stories. December 21st, 1887. The winter solstice brings with it the old memories, the stories that live deeper than history. Tonight, I read again the legend of the Selkie of Loch Katrine, and found myself wondering, as I always do, what truths might be hidden within such tales. The old people knew things we have forgotten, understood connections between the human heart and the natural world that we dismiss too easily as superstition. Perhaps the real magic lies not in whether these stories are literally true, but in their power to awaken something in us that has been sleeping. The journal entries began to reveal the changing seasons as seen from the library windows, the progression from autumn's glory through winter's stark beauty and into spring's tentative awakening. Moira wrote with the careful attention of someone who understood that each season brought its own gifts, its own lessons, its own particular form of beauty. March 15th, 1888. The first crocuses have appeared in the castle garden, small purple flames pushing through the last of the snow. From the library window, they look like scattered jewels against the white ground. I find myself thinking of all the generations of crocuses that have bloomed in this same spot. All the people who have looked out this same window and felt their hearts lift at this first sign of spring's return. There is something profoundly comforting in this continuity, this endless cycle of seasons that connects us to everyone who has ever lived in this place. As morning moved toward afternoon, Alistair found himself completely absorbed in Moira's world. Through her words, he experienced the rhythm of Highland seasons, the daily rituals of castle life, the profound satisfaction of caring for something larger than oneself. Her journal became a window not just into the past, but into a way of living that honored both solitude and connection, both scholarship and wonder. In one particularly moving entry, Moira wrote about the responsibility she felt as keeper of the library's treasures, April 30th, 1888. Sometimes I feel like a guardian of sleeping treasures, Watching over books and manuscripts that contain wisdom our world seems eager to forget. In these quiet hours, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of centuries, I understand that my role is not just to preserve these physical objects, but to keep alive the spirit of curiosity and reverence that created them. Each book is a bridge across time, connecting the thoughts and dreams of those who came before with all who will come after. In caring for these books, I am caring for the continuity of human wonder itself. Alistair felt a deep resonance with these words, recognizing his own calling reflected in Moira's understanding of her work. They were separated by more than a century, but they shared the same fundamental belief in the importance of preserving not just books, but the love of books, the understanding that stories and knowledge were treasures that belonged not to any individual, but to the continuing human family. As afternoon light began to slant through the library windows, Alistair discovered that Moira's journal contained not just daily observations, but detailed notes about the library's collection. She had created her own catalog system, noting not just the contents of each book, but its condition, its provenance, and her own assessment of its particular treasures. The Celtic Manuscript Collection, Shelf 7. These volumes represent the finest examples of Highland monastic art I have encountered. The Book of Kells may be more famous, but our own Highland manuscripts possess a quality of profound spirituality that speaks directly to the heart. The colors remain vivid after all these centuries. Deep blues like Highland locks, gold like autumn gorse, green like spring meadows after rain. Each illuminated letter is a prayer made visible, each decorated margin a celebration of the divine presence in all things beautiful. Reading these detailed descriptions, Alistair realized that Moira had been far more than a librarian. She had been a true scholar, someone who understood both the technical aspects of manuscript preservation and the spiritual significance of the works in her care. Her notes would be invaluable in his own work of cataloging and restoration. But as he continued reading, he began to sense a change in the tone of Moira's entries. The dates jumped forward several years, and her handwriting, while still elegant, showed signs of increased urgency. September 12th, 1895. Word has come that the castle may be sold. The family's fortunes have declined, and there is talk of moving to Edinburgh permanently. My heart breaks at the thought of leaving this place, but even more, I worry about what will become of the library. These books have been my life's work, my greatest joy, my deepest responsibility. How can I bear to abandon them to an uncertain fate? Alistair felt a pang of sympathy for Moira, understanding the anguish she must have felt at the prospect of leaving the library she had devoted her life to maintaining. He continued reading, hoping to learn what had become of her and her beloved books. October 1st, 1895. I have made my decision. I cannot bear to leave the library unprotected, vulnerable to neglect or worse. I have spoken with Mrs. MacLeod, the housekeeper, and she has agreed to help me prepare the library for a long period of closure. We will seal the room properly, protect the most valuable manuscripts with additional wrapping, and ensure that everything is ready for whoever may come after me to continue this work. The next entries described Moira's careful preparations for the library's closure. She wrote detailed instructions for the care of specific books, created multiple copies of her catalog, and even left recommendations for conservation materials and techniques. Reading these entries, Alistair felt as if he were receiving personal instructions from a master craftsman, guidance that bridged the gap between past and present. November 15th, 1895. This is my last entry in this journal, my last evening in the library that has been my sanctuary for so many years. Tomorrow, I will lock the door and entrust the key to Mrs. MacLeod's care, with instructions that it should only be given to someone who understands the true value of what lies within these walls. I am not truly saying goodbye. I realize I am simply closing one chapter so that another may begin when the time is right. Somewhere, sometime, another person will climb these stairs and turn that brass key, and this library will live again. I have prepared everything I can, left all the guidance I am able to provide. Now I must trust that the books themselves will call to the right person when the moment comes. To whoever reads these words, welcome. You have been chosen, just as I was chosen all those years ago. Care for these treasures as I have tried to do. Listen to what they have to teach. Find in them the same peace and wonder that have sustained me through all my years in this place. The library lives in each person who enters it with love and reverence. Through you, it will live again. Alistair closed the journal and sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the full weight of Moira's legacy settling around him. He understood now why Mrs. Elspeth had looked at him with such knowing eyes, why she had said the library had been waiting. Through some mysterious alchemy of time and circumstance, he had been called to continue Moira's work, to become the next guardian of these sleeping treasures. Rising from the chair, he walked to one of the tall windows and looked out at the highland landscape that Moira had loved so deeply. The afternoon light painted the hills in shades of gold and purple, and in the distance, he could see the gleam of a small loch reflecting the sky like a mirror. This was the same view that had inspired Moira's daily observations, the same beauty that had sustained her through years of quiet devotion. He spent the rest of the afternoon exploring more of the library's hidden corners, guided now by Moira's detailed notes and descriptions. In a small alcove behind the poetry section, he found a collection of hand-bound volumes that contained what appeared to be original works by local Highland poets. The verses spoke of mist-covered mountains and wild Highland weather, of ancient stones that held the memory of forgotten peoples, of the deep connection between human hearts and the timeless rhythms of the natural world. In another alcove, he discovered a collection of naturalist journals filled with detailed observations of highland flora and fauna. The authors had been careful observers, noting not just the scientific names and characteristics of various species, but their relationships to local folklore and traditional highland life. Pressed between the pages were specimens of highland wildflowers. Their colors faded, but their forms still perfect, like captured moments of summer preserved through the long highland winters. As evening approached, Alistair lit the brass lamp once again and settled into the reading chair with another of Moira's journals, this one covering her early years in the castle. Through her words, he experienced the excitement of a young scholar discovering the library's treasures for the first time, the overwhelming joy of being surrounded by more books than she had ever dreamed of encountering. June 10th, 1880. I have been here a week now, and still I can hardly believe my good fortune. The library contains treasures I had only read about in academic journals, manuscripts that scholars in Edinburgh would give anything to examine, first editions of works I had thought lost forever, collections of folklore gathered directly from Highland storytellers before the old ways began to disappear. Each day brings new discoveries. This morning, I found a complete collection of Highland clan histories, written by the clan historians themselves rather than outside observers. The stories they tell are different from the official histories, more personal, more immediate. They speak of daily life, of seasonal celebrations, of the deep bonds that connected Highland people to their land and to each other. Through Moira's early journals, Alistair experienced the library as a young scholar would, as an endless source of wonder and discovery, a place where every shelf held the potential for transformative encounters with knowledge and beauty. Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminding him of his own early love affair with old books, the sense of limitless possibility that had drawn him to this profession in the first place. As the evening deepened, Alistair found himself reading Moira's accounts of the scholars and visitors who had come to use the library during her tenure. Each one was described with careful attention to their particular interests and the contributions they made to the library's ongoing scholarly conversations. August 3rd, 1883. Professor McRae from the University of Glasgow spent the entire week examining our collection of Gaelic manuscripts. His excitement at finding previously unknown versions of traditional songs and stories was wonderful to witness. We spent long evenings discussing the relationship between written and oral traditions, the way stories change and develop as they pass from voice to voice across generations. He made an observation that has stayed with me. Every traditional story is really many stories, layer upon layer of meaning, accumulated through countless retellings. To read these manuscripts is to glimpse not just individual tales, but the collective wisdom of a people expressed through the medium of narrative. I find myself thinking about this idea as I work with the collection, understanding more deeply that I am not just preserving individual books, but participating in the great conversation that connects all human seeking after truth and beauty. The night grew deeper around him as Alistair continued reading, each of Moira's entries opening new windows into the intellectual and spiritual life of the Highland Castle. Through her words, he began to understand that the library had been more than a repository of books. It had been a living center of learning, a place where scholars and seekers could come to engage with the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Moira wrote about the seasonal rhythms that shaped life in the castle, the way the changing Highland weather influenced both daily routines and deeper reflections on the relationship between human consciousness and the natural world. December 1st, 1884. The first snow has fallen, transforming the Highland landscape into something from a fairy tale. From the library windows, the world appears purified, essential, reduced to the most basic elements of beauty. In this season of turning inward, the library becomes even more precious, a warm sanctuary filled with the preserved light of human imagination and wisdom. Winter is the season for deep reading, for the kind of sustained attention that allows the most profound books to reveal their secrets. In the long evenings, by lamplight, surrounded by the gentle presence of so many accumulated thoughts and dreams, I feel most fully myself, most completely connected to the great ongoing conversation between all who have ever sought meaning through the written word. As midnight approached, Alistair came across entries that described Moira's own scholarly projects. She had not been content simply to maintain the existing collection, but had undertaken original research, using the library's resources to investigate questions that had long fascinated her. March 20th, 1886. I have spent the winter months working on my study of the relationship between Highland landscape and Highland literature, using the library's extensive collection of topographical works alongside our literary manuscripts. I am beginning to see patterns that have never been formally documented, the way certain geographical features appear again and again in Highland stories, the deep connections between seasonal changes and the emotional rhythms of Highland poetry. The more I study these connections, the more I understand that Highland literature cannot be fully appreciated apart from the landscape that created it. The mist that rises from our locks is the same mist that fills our stories with mystery and possibility. The storms that sweep across our mountains are the same storms that gave our ancestors their understanding of the powerful forces that shape human destiny. Reading these passages, Alistair felt a deep admiration for Moira's scholarly vision. She had understood something that many academics missed: the importance of studying literature not as isolated artistic objects, but as expressions of the living relationship between human consciousness and the natural world. As the hours passed, he found himself completely absorbed in Moira's intellectual journey, following her developing understanding of the deep connections that linked Highland culture, Highland landscape, and Highland ways of knowing. Her journals revealed a mind of remarkable breadth and insight, someone who could move easily between technical analysis of manuscript illumination and profound reflection on the spiritual significance of ancient stories. July 15th, 1888. I have been thinking about the nature of preservation, what it truly means to keep something alive across time. It is not enough simply to protect physical objects from decay, though that is certainly necessary. True preservation requires understanding what made these works valuable in the first place, what human experiences and insights they were created to preserve and transmit. A book is not just paper and ink, but a vessel for human consciousness, a way of allowing thoughts and feelings to travel across the barriers of time and individual mortality. To preserve books properly, one must preserve not just their physical form, but one's own capacity to receive and respond to what they contain. The true library exists not in any building, but in the ongoing relationship between seeking minds and the wisdom they encounter in written form. These reflections resonated deeply with Alistair's own understanding of his work. Like Moira, he had long understood that book conservation was about more than technical procedures. It was about maintaining the living connection between past and present, ensuring that future generations would have access not just to old books, but to the experiences and insights that had made those books worth preserving in the first place. As the first hint of dawn began to touch the eastern windows, Alistair realized that he had spent another entire night in the library, lost in conversation with Moira across the span of more than a century. But unlike his first night here, this experience felt less like discovery and more like homecoming. He was beginning to understand his place in the continuing story of this remarkable place. He rose from the reading chair and walked to the windows, watching as the highland landscape slowly emerged from darkness. The mist was rising from the loch in the distance, creating the same ethereal beauty that Moira had described in her journals. He felt her presence in the library around him, not as a ghost or spirit, but as the living influence of someone whose love and dedication had shaped this place so profoundly that her essence had become part of its very being. Returning to the desk, he opened his own notebook and began to write, adding his voice to the long conversation that connected all who had ever worked in this library. Second day in the Abermoire Library, I have spent the night in conversation with Moira, the remarkable woman who was keeper of this collection for 15 years in the late 1800s. Through her journals, I begin to understand that I am not the first person to find sanctuary in this place, to discover in these books and in this quiet space something essential that the outside world too often lacks. I came here thinking I would be cataloging and preserving old books. Instead, I find myself being inducted into a tradition of guardianship that goes far deeper than technical conservation. I am becoming part of an ongoing commitment to preserving not just written works, but the spirit of reverence and wonder that makes such works meaningful. Moira left detailed instructions for the care of specific manuscripts, recommendations for conservation procedures, and most importantly, her own example of what it means to approach this work with both professional skill and personal devotion. I feel honored to be continuing her work, to be the next link in a chain of care that ensures these treasures will survive to inspire future generations. As he wrote, Alistair felt a deep sense of rightness, a confirmation that he had found not just temporary work, but a calling that would give meaning and direction to all his remaining years. The highland mist outside the windows was beginning to lift, revealing the ancient landscape in all its austere beauty. And he knew that he would spend many more mornings like this one, watching the light return to this timeless place while surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The library had indeed been waiting, as Mrs. Elspeth had said, but now he understood that it had been waiting not just for someone to care for its books, but for someone who would understand that true preservation requires not just protecting physical objects, but keeping alive the love and reverence that makes such objects sacred. In accepting this responsibility, he was not just taking on a job, but joining a fellowship that transcended time, becoming part of the eternal conversation between all who have ever found in books a pathway to deeper understanding of the world and their place within it. And so our story settles into quietness, like mist settling over highland hills, like lamplight fading into dawn, like the gentle closing of a well-loved book. Let yourself drift now into your own peaceful sanctuary, carrying with you the memory of that lamp-lit library, that sense of being exactly where you belong, surrounded by beauty and possibility, and the infinite patience of stories waiting to be discovered. Sleep well, and dream of ancient libraries and highland mists, of books that hold the secrets of peaceful hearts, and of all the quiet magic that waits for us in the turning of each new page. Rest now. Let the story settle around you like a warm blanket, and allow yourself to drift into the gentle embrace of sleep, where your own inner library of dreams awaits.